after a couple of minutes, you see the aroma of that coffee filling the place. And eventually, even neighboring homes. Just the aroma goes around. And we enjoy the aroma. I always say that in Ethiopia, we don't just drink coffee. We start from the aroma. We drink the aroma. We inhale the aroma. That's a nice coffee. That's why I find it very difficult to just get coffee only. You know, you go to a cafe and just get coffee. In Ethiopia, we don't just get coffee. We get the aroma that fills the place. So, Paul is saying, in this victory procession of what happened on the cross, God has somehow released us as the aroma of not coffee, the aroma of not beautiful perfume. We're the aroma of the knowledge of Christ. And his immediate response is, who is equal to such a task? He just celebrates who qualifies to this. That is the source of his joy. The source of his joy is not the immediate things, but he puts his immediate suffering in the context of God is actually releasing the aroma of Christ through us. That's good. I mean, the suffering might be bad. This is good. He rejoices in that. Who is equal to such a task? You see, my friends, it's like, of course, there is a price to pay. Of course, there is suffering. Anyways, people are suffering in this world, whether you are in Christ or no. This is a suffering world. But our suffering is so valuable. There is a value in our suffering, paying a price. Why? Because through our suffering, Christ's aroma goes around. It just fills the entire world. You see, we're not just humanitarian. We're not just humanitarian. When we serve this world, we're not just humanitarian organizations doing humanitarian stuff. When we pick up that beaten, troubled, half-dead person on the road, it's just not a humanitarian action like other humanitarian organizations. We're there shining and releasing the aroma of Christ to this world. What a privilege. What an eternal joy that we play a critical role in spreading the knowledge of Christ as the aroma of Christ. We are ambassadors, he says in chapter 3, verse 18 of 2 Corinthians. We're not just doing stuff. We are ambassadors, representatives, aromas of Christ. And the last one that he reflects. What changed? I am troubled into thanks be to God. Well, he thought of what God has already accomplished through Christ. He thought of what God continues to accomplish through his messengers as an aroma of Christ. But I've touched this yesterday, so I don't want to spend more time here. He also thinks of, I think Paul reflects on God's continuous presence with us. God's continuous presence with us. God's continuous presence with us. I wish I could summarize it, but it's beyond a summary. That's the remaining part of chapter 2. That's chapter 3, chapter 4, 5, 6, 7. I wish I can summarize all them. But I think you got to go and just sever them. It just continually says, we new covenant ministers, new covenant apostles, servants of God. The difference between us and the old covenant is God's presence, God's glory is among us. It's with us. God continually is with us. Now, that's what he says. Who is equal to such a task? What is our ability? And then he continues to tell us that it is not our ability, our strength, but God's strength is revealed through us. Let me just read chapter 3, verse 7 of 2 Corinthians. Now, if the ministry that brought death, which was engraved in the letters of stone, came with glory, so that the Israelites could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory transitory through it was, will not the ministry of the Spirit be even more glorious? And then he says, if the ministry that brought condemnation was glorious, how much more glorious is the ministry that brings righteousness? And then he says, for what was glorious has no glory now in comparison with the surpassing glory in Christ. And he says, that's our hope. That's God's presence among us. Our confidence, if you go a little bit back to verse 4 of chapter 3, he says, such confidence we have through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God, His presence, His glory. Our competence comes when we suffer, God's presence is among us. When we serve, God's glory is with us. So, do we serve with joy even in the midst of sacrificial ministries that we do? Absolutely. How does joy come even in the midst of immediate sacrifices that we are paying for the sake of Christ? Well, we got to learn to put temporary sufferings and sacrifices in the context of what God has already done through Christ, but also in what God continues to do through us. I think that is what brought 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 to 18, and I would like us to read it in closing. No, 2 Corinthians, I'm sorry. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 to 18. Paul says, therefore we do not lose heart. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, he said, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And there is a renewal going on. And he says, if you continue verse 17, for our light and momentary troubles, makes them light and momentary troubles, are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Right? If you continue to verse 18, so we fix our eyes not what is seen, but we fix our eyes on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Now there is this eternal glory that he puts these temporary sufferings. If you want to serve in joy, make sure that you put temporary and light sufferings in the context of the eternal glory and the eternal program that God is doing. My friends, as we serve this broken world, of course there is suffering, so we endure. But of course there is joy. We serve in joy. But we serve in joy as we learn to put the context of our sacrifices in the midst of the bigger program and the bigger picture of what God is doing. Life is worth living. Life is worth sacrificing for God. Life is worth enduring for God, because God is accomplishing these great things through us. He has already accomplished through Christ, but He continually accomplishes this critical role as aromas of Christ around the world, and we serve Him in joy as we think of these immediate sufferings in the context of the bigger picture of what God is doing. May the Lord help us to joyfully continue to serve Him in the coming days.
So thank you, Dr. Mamusha Fenta, for your wonderful presentation and talk. Let us serve joyfully. I'd like to introduce to you now the next lecturer, who is Dr. Rick Paul. He's a thoracic surgeon from the Netherlands, and what I would like you to keep in mind are 4 letters. His name has R-I-C-K, right? So R stands for rapid understanding of the situation. He's a brilliant person, and whatever you explain him, he catches it in 1 second. I stands for incredible, inside and outside. He has a wonderful heart, is always there for you, and outside, let's say in brackets, the Dutch are the most direct people you can meet all over the world. So outside he's sharp and quick in helping you. C stands for caring. He cares for his patients, he cares for his students and for his residents. He's a wonderful lecturer and teacher. And last but not least, K stands, keep in mind what he's going to tell you today. So please, Rick Paul, come over.
Dear friends, what can I say after such an introduction? It's my big sin that I even like it. I apologize. If you look at the program, I stand between you and the tea break. Sorry for that. We go through it quite quickly. Now, the organizational committee gave me the title of the topic, Bridging the Generation Gap. Where do I put it? Can you advance the slides when I put up my hand? Also possible. Brilliant. Generation gap, the difference in thoughts, action and tastes between 2 generations. Simple definition. And to build a bridge, both sides need to work. And this is a clear picture in which both sides are working hard. Both sides have an overall picture, and both sides want to reach each other. This is the ideal situation. But if you talk to students, and over the last 10 years I've talked to many residents and many students, although in the more Western culture, but the picture is totally different. Next slide. This is how they see the future. This is how they think they should bridge the gap. And there are several factors creating the fog. It was the COVID pandemic in the last years. I think, and we will briefly talk about that, there are some changes in faith, in theology. We can blame the present culture and also the use of our time. And we will briefly discuss each aspect. It's like what we did when I was young, ice flake jumping on the river. No longer possible due to the climate change, but in the old days you would try to reach the other side by quickly jump from one flake to another. You have to touch briefly and keep moving, and that's what we will do. Touch briefly and keep moving. Next slide. Now the recent pandemic, the bad news is it was a real big crisis for you. There was loss of family and friends, loss of contacts, loss of travel, teaching, and opportunities. There's also some good news. You are young and still alive, and you're optimistic, and more important, God is still God. Now my question to them and to you is, how did you react during the pandemic? With depression, retreat, complaining? Residents should complain, otherwise they're ill. Feeling lost? Or were you thinking reflecting, expecting. Every crisis brings a new situation where you're preparing. Or could it be that the pandemic brought to the surface what was already going on for a long time? Some change in fate, and I put there a question mark, because I like history, and in every time and place, the Christian belief has had its own emphasis and omissions. Do I have to mention the 16th, 17th century when Christians thought that slavery was a normal thing? But in the older days, there was a lot of emphasis on the work of Christ, on God. And history is the working out of God's plan in this world. And He will use you and me to fulfill that plan. But the most important part is God. And in modern days, there is slightly more emphasis on the Christian. And you can hear that in the songs, you can hear that in the theology, that actually God is there to help us. Evangelicals, and here I tease a little, evangelicals may suffer most because they have a very strong loving Father notion. And of course God is, but He's more than that. And because of this strong notion, they expect a direct answer from God for every decision they have to take. And I can tell you, it rarely happens. It's not God's usual way to deal with you. He will speak through His Word. And that's why we need to read the Bible, but also study the Bible. But if you wait for direct answers from God, you'll become anxious. You may feel lost. And it's happening to a lot of students. Now, how do they try to see God's answer, finding God's will for their life? We see God's answer directly in dreams, in Bible verses, isolated Bible verses, or in special circumstances. We want the answer here and now. And we also expect Him to clear the roads in our life. And in some theology nowadays, you find that. If you serve God, He'll make you rich and famous. But if you read your Bible carefully, you study your Bible, nowhere in the Bible God promises a smooth life. A safe arrival, yes, but not a smooth life. Look at the lives of Joseph, Moses, Daniel, Esther, Apostle Paul. And yes, God will give you light, but usually for the next step. He will keep you dependent on Him. You get light for the next step, but not a clear view to the horizon. And maybe that's also His mercy, because we would be rather afraid. I even give sometimes a warning that I say, beware of those direct revelation. I'm a bit careful. We can easily be deceived. And then we read into the text what we want to read. Because it's our strong desire. And we look for texts that confirm our own desire. We can even, and that's worse, but I've seen it, we can try to manipulate others. God told me that you, God told me that we, and I think direct revelations should be tested. If God tells you that we, He will always go before you and also tell the other person. But what are the results of not getting those direct answers from God? Often God gets the blame. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't provide the opportunity. and forgetting God's plan, then we are trying to feel at home in this world. And then the entertainment becomes important to fill the gap. Now, some thoughts in between. God, again, has revealed his will in the Bible. So study it. Don't flip through it for certain verses. Study it. And God does not have puppets or robots. He gave you a good brain. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be a student. He gave you a good brain. So use it. And always ask other people. There is wisdom in asking counsel. No one is smart as all of us. But that was the big problem of the pandemic, that people were very isolated and couldn't ask other people. We quickly go to the next factor, the present culture. In the Western culture, there is no longer a real truth or an absolute value. We don't need God. We don't need a God. We use science. But science only tells us how things are, how things work. And it does not have an answer on the why. Why am I here on earth? And to all of us, this is a very fundamental question. And it has major consequences. Modern Western civilization is the very first one in history to have no agreed answer on the purpose of life. But you're now made responsible for your own future. And when you talk to psychologists and other people, it's a lot about self-expression, self-realization, self-fulfillment, self-discovery. You can get it, so do it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. But the opposite is, if you fail, then it's your fault. Then you're a loser. And it places a very heavy burden on the shoulders of young people. And the postmodernism, as we call it, also affects our learning. Why? Why should you learn facts? Why should you look back into history if there are no real truths? Just Google for the information and then decide what you do or how you react. But actually, we're getting a kind of fast food info. We're going from books to summaries, to outlines, to headlines, to tweets. And there are what they call the three big cats of internet. They're Google, Facebook, and Amazon. They determine what you will see and also how you see it. It's mainly headlines. It's not got a balanced view. And they use very clever algorithms to keep your attention. And I read what the CEO of Netflix said. We are competing with sleep. Now to students, I say, sleep is God's own medicine. You need that. But now you can do, in a very popular series, you can do binge watching to see everything one after the other. And a lot of people are using their phones even in nighttime. And the newest development is Mediaverse by Facebook, making virtual reality always available. And it's an easy escape to go into virtual reality. I said I like history. You go back to and see the life of Winston Churchill. In the middle of the Second World War, he went to America to ask for help and more help. And he gave a talk on Harvard. And just look, here was a man in the middle of the Second World War, already thinking on the time that would follow. And he said, the empires of the future will be the empires of the mind. And that's happening now. It's a battle that does not appear in the headlines of the news. It's about Sudan war, it's about Ukraine-Russia war, but that is the real war. And finally, another factor is our individualism, especially in the West. You, as young people, you're told that you're amazing. Well, you are, but you're amazing. You should follow your dreams, and no one should stand in your way. Find your true self and have the courage to live accordingly. Just compare that with the Christian thought of God calling you. So where do we stand? We grow up in a postmodernist culture. No real truth, no absolute values. We're getting more and more information. Yes, you, the young generation, have far more information than we get, than we have, and than we get. But little wisdom. And you're very lonely. You tend to be lonely in spite of all the tools for communication. I sometimes ask a resident, how many friends do you have? Well, they have 1,500 Facebook friends. I said, means you have no friend. Life is seen as a journey with many flights. And if you miss one flight, the whole journey is lost. And if you make the wrong choice, we'll be unhappy all our life. And that's why young people postpone making decisions. Because what if you make the wrong choice? And this is a word I found, is an existing Greek word. No wonder we have the gay fearophobia. We have the fear of crossing the bridge. But life goes on. We cannot postpone. We have to cross the bridge. And you want to, and you have to make your own life. But we, the older generation, still run the hospital. And we control the training. So how do you prepare yourself for the crossing? Because if you don't, you'll be in for a few big shocks. Society and the hospitals are still a system that want you to adapt. Adapt into the system, serve other people, but you've been told to express yourself. Now to prepare, ask yourself some questions. Major question in life. Does it bring me closer to God? Yes, do it. No, don't do it. But if many questions, the answer is not very clear. Then go to the next question. Does it fit my talents? Does it make my heart sing? That's what I tell them when they say, what should I be? What should I become? I said, what are your talents? Because if you have to work against your talents, you'll get a burnout. Does it fit your talents? Do it. Does it not fit your talents? Don't do it. And then they say, but what are my talents? I said, come on. You're 20 plus, you should know yourself. If you don't know it, ask your friends, your real friends. And if they are not willing to tell you, ask your mother. She knows you. If it's not clear, consider the next question. Consider your non-negotiables and negotiables, like Daniel. Now, your negotiables are the things that define you. Your non-negotiables, that are the things that define you. That's how you are. That's who you are. Think about Daniel. He came to Babylon. He got a total reset by name and culture and everything. But there were certain things he was not willing to give up. What are you prepared to give up? What will you never give up? You may have another calling for a family, making music, whatever. Whenever a resident who comes or a student who comes, I want to be a surgeon. I sometimes ask them, what are you willing to give up? How much pain can you have? Because in order to reach the East, you have to leave the West. And another question I asked, what is your time management? How do you spend your time? And looking back, I'm no exception. Many hours of a day you waste. Looking back, you waste time. Entertainment, fun, trying to postpone decisions. And the question is, where do you want to be when you're 29 years plus 364 days? Tomorrow you will be 30. Where do you want to be? Whom do you want to be? Prepare. And of course, seek advice. Build your own tribe, people whom you can really trust. 2 or 3 good friends who will speak their mind. Next one. Oh, in short, understand your culture. So bridging the gap, the word is understanding. You have to understand your culture, but you also have to understand yourself because you are part of your culture. Culture is what we breathe in, what is normal to us. And you have access to all the info, but you need more than that. You are the generation who want to make an impact, but you need knowledge plus wisdom. And then you can create an impact. And start to understand others, also those on the other side of the gap. And I quickly talk, your tea is coming. I quickly talk on the other side of the gap, the older generation. That's not paradise either. It is a new field with its own problems and rules and expectations. And they may clash very much with the expectations you have. Let's look what's happening there. The culture of the old generation. I was trained that way. Job goes before everything. With family, we spent in my training time more than 100 hours a week in the hospital. And there was an adherence to very strict hierarchy systems. Well, the higher I came in the hierarchy, the more I started to like it, but there's strong hierarchy systems. And the training is based on this very old master-apprentice model. And there is a very old-fashioned handing over of knowledge and hopefully wisdom. But they define it, and it's hard for the young ones, because often position and income define the training scheme. I've traveled a lot, I've traveled extensively, and in many countries, the older ones do not train the young ones fully, because they're afraid to get competition, and it will affect their income. So the hospital is not paradise. In many countries, doctors are known for being arrogant. If you ask what is the most common feature of doctors, here we talk about serving other peoples. It started already when I applied for the medical school. I said, why do you want to study medicine? The answer was, I want to help people. And they would look at you and say, if you want to help people, you do shopping for your neighbor. But here is science. And many doctors have become salesmen for medical products. And once I heard, sorry, I don't know a Christian doctor in this place. So what has happened? What has happened? Now, if you look at your medical training, it is one big molding process. It's changing you into a professional. And of course, that's good. It gives you knowledge. It provides you with skills. And it also provides you with an attitude in thinking and in behavior. And most of us did well. And so will you. You will do well. But simply statistically, some of you gradually will start to misbehave. I'm not saying anything about your pleasant characters, but just statistically, some of you. And there will be behavior guided by the want of money and power, and also addiction. It's very common among doctors to be addicted. Because if you're a doctor, who should guide the guide? They're prone to get addicted. And is there a way to avoid this? How did it happen? This is what I teach my residents. And I was able to do so in the Netherlands in a nationwide day for teaching young residents. They asked me to, and I told them about this one. I think it's important. In the Second World War again, C.S. Lewis, in the middle of the war, he gave a lecture to the students of King's College. London was burning, and he was talking to the students about the situation after the war. What should happen to them? And he said, every system, every society has two systems. And he called it, the second one, the inner ring. There is an official one, and it's based on hierarchy. In the army, the general, the colonel, the major, the captain, and then a soldier. That's the normal system. In the hospital, let's say on a surgical department, you have the professor in university, you have the senior staff, you have the staff, you have the resident, and at the very bottom, there is you, the poor student, the young resident. And there's sometimes a situation you can be rather afraid to be in. Now the official system, but there is a second system also. Because what if you are a young resident and in this very uncomfortable position, what if the director of the hospital is your uncle? Hey, that gives you a certain protection. You don't feel that you're not so afraid any longer. So there is everywhere, and it starts already in the classroom, on the primary school or in the secondary school. There is an unofficial system, and it's based on influence. There is always in every society, in every group, the little inner group, the people who rule things, who are the popular ones. Now the official system is visible. It's open and it has accountability. And the unofficial system, which Lewis called the inner ring, or the Russian writer Tolstoy, he called it the second system. The unofficial system is hidden, is not transparent, but it works. It's a kind of unofficial society within a society. And there it comes, there is the tendency among people to arrange things by the second system, to find your way. Now this inner ring is not necessarily bad, but it can easily become so. Because you and I, we people, have a strong desire to belong to the inner ring, or to know what's going on, and to get accepted. People start to compromise their own values. Because they will sometimes approach you, and they will say to you, well, we have looked at you, and let's have a cup of coffee to chat about a few things. We need your help because you're a sensible person, and they will ask something from you that is not 100% fair. Not 100% correct. It's not a big mistake. It's not a big sin. But it's just not fair. And to get accepted, many people are willing to compromise their own values. And like I say, it starts with small steps, very gradually. And of course, the human mind, we have a lot of, a great talent for self-justification. Well, someone has to do it. Or if I don't do it, another one has to do it. Very common. If I don't do it, it may turn out even worse. I will be in position that I can just more or less stop it or modify it or soften it or downright fear. What if I don't do it? You'll be rejected. And the fear of rejection by the inner ring to get accepted, but to be rejected because you say no is very, very difficult. And sometimes people get downright cynical. That, well, that's how the world turns. That's how it is. Next one. And the result is that good people may, step by step, end up doing very bad things. So what you should do, and that's maybe a good thing for the last day of the year, every year you ask yourself the question, am I still the doctor I wanted to be? Every year ask yourself the question, what are my priorities? Is it about me, my career, money? Is it still the same when I wanted to be a doctor to help other people? Next one. Because I think this is a major pitfall, and I like the African proverbs. One does not have to learn how to fall into a pit. All it takes is the first step. The others take care of themselves. Now, bridging the generation gap. I'm really approaching the end. You know, that's the way of speakers to say that they go on for another half an hour, but I won't. Understand what creates the gap. In medicine, everything starts with a good diagnosis. And then start to build a bridge. Build a bridge and not a wall. That's what we easily do. And then start crossing the bridge. Start crossing the bridge, reflecting on what I said. Next one. And let me give you a poem. It's rather unusual for a surgeon, but I still like fairy tales and poems and everything. And it's quoted by King George VI from England before the Second World War. You know, I have something with the Second World War, with history. And you may replace gate with bridge. But the poem goes, I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. But he replied, go out in the darkness, put your hand in the hand of God, shall be to you better than light, safer than a known way. Next one. Dare to cross the bridge. Next one. I end with giving you homework. I'm not telling you to read a big book. I give you homework. You see where I have stolen everything from. You go to Google and you go for Rudyard Kipling, and there's a poem, If. It's just one page. And you read it carefully, and you read it again very carefully. And there's a lot of wisdom. He's not a Christian. But sometimes they can say very, very good things. If, one page. You go to Lewis, you Google for the inner ring, it's 7 pages. If you're very lucky, you get a layout with 6 pages. But usually it's 7. And you go to YouTube, and you Google for Prince Ahab, autocorrect humanity. He's a rapper, and I hate rap music. But he's good. It takes you 5 minutes. And you go to Rick Rigsby, and he talks to students on a graduation about making an impact. 10 minutes. And another graduation speech by William McRaven. He was an admiral of the American Marines. Make your own bed. Very, very practical advice. You can find anything between 10 minutes and 60 minutes. I would advise the 16 minutes, but the 10 minutes version will do. And then you go to a very good book, and it's available as an e-book. And otherwise, you can find it. You can get it by Amazon. And it's an e-book. Kevin de Jong, Just Do Something. And he talked about young students and give them very practical advice about making choices, and you will recognize a lot, and you will see where I have stolen it from. Next one. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy your tea. She said, maybe there are questions. I said, well, surgeons are not used to get questions. But if you have a question, please come forward. You will have to speak loud because one ear is deaf and with the other one I don't hear well. Yeah. All clear, then do your homework.
Thank you, Rick, very much for your presentation. Lindale, is she somewhere? Oh. Okay, we wait for the announcement, how we will continue. Ah, wonderful.
Good morning. Bonjour. Habari ya asubuhi. Okay, thank you. It's good to see you all this morning. And we have some few notices to make. After here, we are going for tea break. And after tea break, we are going to have breakout sessions. And I will explain on the breakout sessions. They will be displayed shortly.